Okay, so you sent us over some really fascinating articles about Google Stadia, and wow, what a story, right? Like this huge vision of cloud gaming that was supposed to, kind of make consoles obsolete and give us this like instant access to all these amazing games.
Mm.
For a while there, it really felt like, I don't know, a glimpse into the future of gaming.
Yeah, it definitely had that like futuristic feel to it, right? Like the idea of just jumping into these like high-end games without having to buy all this expensive hardware on the surface was like super appealing. But as we know now, the reality of Stadia's journey was, well, a bit more complicated.
Yeah, it really was. So we dug into this piece from Cognitive Market Research called Google Stadia, Why Cloud Gaming Failed to Connect with Gamers. And what really stood out to us is that the Stadia's, I guess you could say, downfall leading up to its shutdown in January 2023 wasn't just one single misstep. It was more like this combination of different challenges.
Right.
So that's what we're going to explore in this deep dive, those big challenges. Some of them were kind of like fundamental infrastructure hurdles that they just couldn't seem to overcome.
Yeah.
And then there was this disconnect between what gamers actually want and expect.
Yeah.
Then there were some key strategic miscalculations. And, ultimately, I think what's really fascinating is what we can all learn from this, really ambitious but unsuccessful endeavor.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's unpack all of this. Let's start with the very foundation, the infrastructure. I mean, this is Google, right? They're they're the backbone of so much of the internet with Google Cloud.
Yeah.
And they handle, massive amounts of streaming with YouTube. You'd think that the technical side of this would be a given for them.
Right. That's definitely the initial assumption. And it highlights this like a really critical point about cloud gaming. Even though Google has all this, unparalleled expertise in cloud infrastructure, the demands of interactive real-time gaming are just completely different than something like streaming a video.
Right.
And what's so fascinating here is how sensitive gaming is to latency.
Oh, yeah?
So with something like a movie, a little bit of buffering usually isn't even noticeable, right?
Right.
But in gaming, even the tiniest delays, we're talking milliseconds here, which is what latency is, it can just completely ruin the experience. Imagine trying to pull off this really precise maneuver in a racing game, or you're aiming in a shooter and there's even this slight lag between when you hit the button and what you see on the screen.
Yeah.
It's so disruptive to gameplay.
Totally. It goes from being this really immersive and engaging experience to just being frustrating and basically unplayable.
Yeah.
And the article really hammers home this point that achieving that ultra low latency wasn't just some desirable feature. It was absolutely essential for cloud gaming to, really compete with a console or a gaming PC sitting right there in your living room.
Exactly.
And it seems like achieving that level of performance consistently across such a widespread network, I mean, this proved to be a much bigger challenge than they initially thought, right?
Yeah, it really was. And that ties directly into the next big infrastructure problem, which was just the reality that internet reliability and bandwidth, it varies so much across the world. I mean, Google might have envisioned this world where everybody has access to these super fast, stable internet connections, but that's not the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And the research actually points out that for an optimal 4K streaming experience, Google recommended a 35 milli-AEPs connection. And while that's definitely achievable for lots of people, especially in well-developed urban areas, think about people in rural locations or even just areas with older infrastructure, or even just times of day when the network is congested.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of potential Stadia users, it was never going to be a great experience. At best, it was going to be compromised, and at worst, it just wouldn't work reliably.
Right.
So that really limited their potential customer base right from the start. It's like they built this amazing race car, but they forgot to check if there were even roads for it to drive on.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And then on top of that, didn't they also have this issue with limiting which devices people could actually use Stadia on when it first launched?
Totally. In the beginning, you couldn't just grab any smart TV or tablet and start playing. There were all these specific limitations. And they really pushed their own Stadia controller, for the best experience.
Right.
So instead of it being this frictionless play anywhere experience, you had to buy into their specific ecosystem, maybe even invest in new hardware.
Right.
It wasn't that universal access that people were hoping for.
So it sounds like right off the bat, the infrastructure side of things was a huge hurdle.
Definitely.
But then reading this article, it's clear that Google also kind of misjudged who gamers are and what they really care about. And that's a completely different type of obstacle, right? It's less about the tech specs and more about understanding human behavior and people's preferences.
Yeah, exactly. That human element is just critical. And what's interesting here is how loyal gamers often are to the platforms they're already using. Like, think about someone who's been playing PlayStation or Xbox for years. They've built up this huge library of games, they've got their friends online, they're familiar with how everything works. Asking them to just switch to this new platform where they can't even bring their old games with them, that's a big ask. It would be like, if you'd spent years building this huge music collection and then someone told you, okay, now you have to switch to this other platform where you have to buy all your music again.
Right. No one's going to be happy about that.
Exactly.
And Stadia didn't even have a very big selection of games when it launched, right? It seems like they were missing that killer app, that one game you absolutely have to play.
Totally. Where was that system seller? That amazing, unique experience that makes people say, okay, I need to get Stadia just to play this one game. They really didn't have that.
Yeah.
And that leads into the whole issue of game ownership and pricing. The research emphasizes how gamers are used to either owning their games, whether it's a disc or a digital download, or having access to a ton of games through a subscription service like Xbox Game Pass, right?
Right.
But with Stadia, you had to buy each game individually, even if you already owned it on another platform. And you didn't really own it. You were just buying a license to stream it.
Oh, okay.
And it wasn't even part of a subscription service. So for a lot of gamers, it was like, why would I rebuy all these games I already have, especially on this platform that might not even be around in a few years?
That's the question, right? It's like, what's the incentive? And it almost seems like Google themselves didn't know who their target audience was. The article talks about how Stadia didn't really appeal to casual gamers or the more hardcore gamers. It's like they were trying to be everything to everyone and ended up being nothing to no one.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, for casual gamers who just want something easy and affordable, Stadia probably wasn't that appealing. They could just get a Nintendo Switch or play free games on their phone, right?
Right.
And for hardcore gamers, even if some of the concerns about latency were exaggerated, it was still a big mental barrier. Plus, Stadia didn't have great multiplayer features at first, and a lot of people thought it just wouldn't be as responsive as playing on a console or PC. So yeah, it's like they aimed for everyone and missed both groups.
And then there's the whole marketing side of things. It seems like Google really struggled to explain what Stadia actually was and, more importantly, why anyone should care.
Right.
Like the article mentions how their early marketing sometimes made it sound like Stadia would replace consoles completely, which obviously didn't happen.
Yeah, and that kind of messaging just created a lot of confusion. People weren't sure what hardware they needed, how the streaming worked, or how much it would actually cost compared to just buying a console and games the normal way.
Right.
And their marketing focused a lot on the tech side of things, the cloud, the instant streaming. But they didn't do a good job of explaining why any of that mattered to the average gamer. Like, what were the real benefits? Think about how Microsoft markets Xbox Game Pass. They talk about value, community, having access to hundreds of games for a monthly fee. It makes you feel like you're part of something. Stadia just didn't have that.
It sounds like one was selling tech specs and the other was selling an experience.
Exactly.
So we've got these big infrastructure problems, a misunderstanding of the target audience, confusing marketing. It sounds like Stadia was in trouble from the very beginning.
Yeah, it was definitely an uphill battle.
But it's not like Google didn't try to fix things, right?
No, they definitely made some changes along the way. They added the Stadia Pro subscription, which gave you some games for a monthly fee. They made it work with more devices, and they kept adding more games. But by that point, I think a lot of gamers had already lost faith in Stadia. Those early mistakes really hurt their reputation.
Yeah. And then there was that big moment in early 2021 when they shut down their own game development studios. That seemed like a pretty clear sign that they weren't going to make those big exclusive games that everyone was hoping for.
Absolutely. Without those must-have games that you couldn't play anywhere else, Stadia just couldn't compete.
Right.
It's a good lesson for anyone making a gaming platform. You need great content that people actually want to play.
And sadly, that brings us to the end. In January 2023, Google shut down Stadia for good. The article even mentions that they refunded everyone who bought games or hardware, which is pretty unusual for a tech company. It just shows how badly things went.
Yeah, giving those refunds was probably their way of trying to smooth things over with people. But it was a pretty public admission that Stadia had failed.
So Stadia is gone, but the article makes a good point that it's a valuable lesson for anyone working in tech. What are some of the key takeaways here? What can other companies learn from Stadia, especially if they're trying to do something new and innovative?
Well, The research boils it down to a few key points. First, you have to make sure the underlying technology actually works before you launch anything. Even if your idea is revolutionary, if the infrastructure can't handle it, you're going to have problems.
Makes sense.
Second, you have to really understand your customers and what they want. Just because you can build something doesn't mean people will want to use it, especially if it means changing their habits or leaving behind things they already like. Stadia kind of forgot that gamers are already invested in their consoles and their games.
Yeah, you can't just expect people to switch overnight.
Exactly. And the third takeaway is about messaging and marketing. If you're doing something new and different, you have to be able to explain why it's better than what's already out there. Stadia never really did that. Their marketing was confusing, and they never really made a strong case for why people should choose Stadia over everything else. And finally, content is king, especially in gaming.
Right.
You need those exclusive games that people can only play on your platform. Stadia struggled with that, and it really hurt them in the end.
There's also this interesting fast fact in the article that I wanted to mention. Even though Stadia itself failed, the technology behind it didn't just disappear. Google actually turned it into something called immersive stream for games back in 2022.
Oh yeah, I read about that.
So other companies can use Google's cloud gaming tech to power their own services. It shows that even when a product fails, the technology can still be valuable in other ways.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that innovation isn't always a straight line. Sometimes you learn more from your failures than your successes.
And the author of this article, Manjari Khan here, actually comes from a market research background in the pharma and healthcare industry,
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
which is kind of cool, right? It's like some from a completely different field, bringing their expertise to the tech world and showing that the principles of understanding the market and your customers are universal.
Yeah, I mean, whether you're selling medicine or video games, you have to know who your audience is and what they want.
Exactly. So to wrap things up, I think Google Stadia is a perfect example of how even a huge company like Google can fail if they don't get the basics right. They underestimated the challenges of the technology, they misunderstood their target audience, and they didn't have the content to keep people engaged.
Yeah, it wasn't just a tech failure, it was a business failure, too.
So thinking about all of this, it really makes you wonder, what other big tech ideas might fail for similar reasons? And what can we learn from Stadia to make sure that doesn't happen again? Lots to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.